Hey folks, Dave Isaacs here with you, and I want to talk to you today about left hand position or fret hand position. This is something that I think a lot of students have some misapprehensions about. I hear folks getting a lot of bad advice, and so I just wanted to take a moment to talk about some basic principles. First of all, my general thinking about playing the guitar in general is that the mechanics of your hand are already the best way for you to look to move, the natural way your hand already moves. So when you go to the guitar, there's really no reason why the way you use your hand should be any different than the way you use it to do anything else. So let me be specific about that. Too many people approach playing the guitar like typing, in the sense that when you type, you are basically hovering your hands over a small space, not really moving your arms, and you're letting your fingers do all the work, and everything is directed this way. That's really not the case when it comes to the guitar. One certainly can play that way in the sense that if your instrument is set up light action, light touch, your fingers really can do a lot of the work. But in terms of fluidity, in terms of tone, in terms of making the most out of the sound you're going to get out of your guitar, you want to use more than your fingers because there is more than, well, first of all, there is strength and power back here behind your wrist going all the way up the arm. But you also get more sound, more resonance when you are more efficiently sitting on the string. Let's look at this a little bit. So if I'm just playing a single note, there's my default. Notice my neck is elevated, and that's partly just so you can see me on camera if I'm down here like this. Not really any different. My thumb is pointing at the ceiling. My finger is curled. Notice that both knuckles are bent. Now, that gives me essentially a level wrist if I'm looking at this line. In other words, not bending here. This is what I'm really trying to avoid. There are times when this is what you have to do, but that's kind of the point. There is no single hand position. Your hand position depends on what you're trying to do and the guitar you're playing it on. So, even if I just walk across my optimal position for this bass note is different than my optimal position for this treble note because first of all, I have more ground to cover, simple enough. And if I just try to extend my finger, it's not going to reach. It's going to go up here. What I need to do to play a low bass note is swing forward a little bit. There is a natural range of motion of your arm. If your thumb is back here resting on wherever you are on the neck, and we'll talk about the thumb more in a second, you should be able to pivot. Don't think of, I mean, you could think of this as dropping the wrist, but you could just as easily think of it as rolling your thumb around the semicircle of the back of the guitar neck. Now, if you are one of those people who has gotten used to pushing down on the top of the guitar neck, you are locking yourself into this position. You are actually closing your hand because any kind of pressure with the thumb compresses the middle of the hand. Remember that your fingers don't end here. They go all the way down, right? The mechanism continues into the hand. So as soon as you start compressing this, try it away from the guitar, you'll feel you cannot move your fingers. And so a lot of people really work against themselves when it comes to this, especially with things like bar chords. So again, notice this, right? You want to find what I'm going to call a neutral position. You hold your fret hand out in front of you and relax it. It should look like this. It's unlikely to look like that. It's unlikely to look like this. It's unlikely to look like that. A relaxed hand has curled fingers and a level thumb, more or less. You see my thumb is not extended, and that tip joint is slightly bent because when I'm relaxed, that's what it wants to do. Your hand may not do exactly that. That's okay, but you want to know what your hand actually does when your hand is relaxed. So when I bring this up to this first fret F, I am essentially just resting my fingertip on the wire. Remember, the string is a cylinder. And again, going back to the typewriter analogy, I'm not coming at it straight in from out here. I am resting on it, arguably from above and hanging off the string, like a picture on a hook. And if you play with that, I think you'll find that's a very natural feeling thing. And when I get down here to these bass notes, because I need to extend further, I'm going to let that finger straighten out a little bit. I'm also no longer on the fingertip, I'm more on the pad. There are times, if I want, say, this chord, that yes, I have to drop my wrist, I have to drop my thumb, I have to be a bit more forward, a bit more bent in order to clear the other strings. But if I'm playing a scale, you can see how my hand position changes a little bit as I go from the thicker bass strings to the thinner treble strings. Consider that if you watch bass players, electric bass players, you generally do not see them like this. You generally see bass players like this. Not so much fingertip, more the pad of the thumb. And you will find, if you play with this, that there is literally more low end, more low bass in that note when I flatten out the finger and use my pad than when I use my fingertip. This note is incomplete. It's not as warm, it's not as full as this one. There's more low end because essentially you're holding the string down more efficiently. If this seems like nitpicky stuff to you, I'll just point out to you that your overall control really depends on your ability to get around, not just your ability to hit a target. So these are targets, but if I play this as a chromatic scale, you might have been taught that you need to be able to do this with a fixed hand. There are situations where that might be true, perhaps, but I'm going to suggest to you that it's more efficient to let my bigger, stronger muscle move my fingertips, essentially to carry the fingertip into position, and that means that my arm tilts a little bit so that each of those fingers is balancing on the string. And even when you're trying to get around quickly, that little pivot is not going to slow you down. In fact, arguably, you can move the fingers much more quickly and accurately if they are supported by the power of the arm behind. So in other words, when you shift, that was sloppy, my arm does the work. I'm not dragging my finger. It's literally my forearm carrying the fingertip into place. You can practice this by just experimenting with touching a note and deciding whether you are bearing down, pushing from behind with your thumb, or resting, leaning on the string. It's like your direction is actually back towards your body. We're going to break this rule all the time. If I'm playing blues and I want to bend strings, my thumb's going to go up here and I am going to squeeze. Now, I could bend with my arm, and arguably this is where you get good vibrato from, using the arm rather than the fingers. And that applies to this kind of thing. As to this, I mean, this is an arm move, not a finger move. Nothing I'm saying here is obsolete, except that odds are you have the same anatomy that I do. The variables are going to be the proportions of your hand, fingers to palm, fingers to hand, hand to arm, all of that. How long are your arms? And also, what guitar are you playing? What's the shape of the neck? What's the action like? There's lots of variables here. So there is no absolute on where your hand should be, but you're going to play better if where your hand normally is most of the time close as you can be to this natural relaxed position. And then the arm allows you 360-degree movement. If I'm playing, say, a D chord, I'm going to be swung out a little bit. If I'm playing this G, I'll be swung out a little bit. If I play this F bar, I'm swung in. And I say swung, I'm talking about my elbow. This does not work very well. However, neither does this. you might have been taught that your hand position is basically the same in all your open chords. Now, I would say in this chord family it is, D, C, G, but I go to an E, the fingers are aligned a little differently. So when you have fingers lined up on the same fret, you're going to end up, very possibly, a little more like this, or that's what my hand likes to do. So if I'm playing this A and this G, my fingers are more aligned vertically with the fret, and so in order to do that, my elbow's out a little bit. The single point in this lesson is that your connection with the guitar does not end here, but that's the way too many people think about it. Let's just address this F bar chord for a minute, because this is where most people learn about the dropped wrist and the dropped thumb. And people will talk about, well, I was told to do X with my thumb. My first guitar teacher would say, keep your thumb down, keep your thumb down. Well, okay, if I'm playing classical guitar, but if I am doing this, my hand is a lot more relaxed with my thumb up. This is a much more natural position for a D chord than this. If this is what your D chord looks like, I promise you're working too hard. However, when I go to an F chord, the operative thing with the bar is that I need to be able to pinch my treble strings with the edge of my index finger. I am not straight onto the string, I am turned, and essentially what we're taking advantage of is this very strong sort of vice grip between the pad of your thumb and the edge of your finger. There's a lot of power there. Well, you're not going to get to that like this. It's impossible. First of all, my finger is pointing at the wall. I need it to point essentially at the ceiling. So this is an arm movement. My wrist is dropped, but it's not overly crooked, because you see what happens to the thumb when I do that. So what I want is this nice relaxed V that can pinch those treble strings, and look at how much I'm on the side. And now these fingers, middle ring, pinky, are much closer to where I already need them to be. And then when I move in and out of the bar chord, you see the wrist pivot. When I move up, I'm using my arm. Elbow pivot. Watch guitarists that have to get around a lot. Watch classical players, watch jazz players. Now, everyone's going to be a little different. The size of the hand makes a big difference in how much pivot you need. If you have really long fingers, you probably don't do much of this. My fingers are not particularly long. If I want to play a chord voicing where my pinky has to be on a bass string, I have no choice but to pivot in. My pinky won't get here, otherwise it's just plain not long enough. So be aware, basically, that the way your body is made, you have, as I called it before, a 360-degree range of motion. We can swing back and forth on the pad of the thumb, and this is an elbow move that brings either the fingers more in line with the frets, or brings the little finger and the ring finger more to the bass side for when we need things like this. And then the forward and back movement of the arm that rolls across the rounded back of the neck. And the bottom line is simply that you should not be locked into any of these positions, but you should be thinking about your hand having this 360-degree range of motion, or at least it's a sphere on this side of the guitar neck, right? And this is what allows you to get around. So I'm not saying you shouldn't practice stretches. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice reach, but you should be aware that when you do those things, if it forces you to lock your hand into the T-Rex claw, you are actively working against yourself and making it harder to play fluidly. I'm going to be posting more videos on this kind of thing, because honestly, my thinking about playing the guitar, mechanically speaking in space, has gotten completely turned on its head in the last few years, and it has made a difference in my playing, in my fluidity, in my ease. I think it'll help you too. So please stay tuned. Comment with your thoughts. I know this can be a little bit of a controversial topic sometimes, especially if other teachers have told you something different. But I'm telling you, I think this makes perfect sense from the perspective of, I have a body that's made a certain way, I have a guitar that's made a certain way, laws of physics are immutable, and we're just trying to get these things to get along. And I think that makes you a better guitar player. Thanks for watching.